Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. I'm Paul Galloway, Senior Advisor at Strategic Treasurer. I'm joined today by Craig Jeffery, Founder and Managing Partner of the firm. Craig, I'd like to talk to you today about Treasury Aggregators and some of the findings from the latest Technology Analyst Report. This is something that our listeners can find on our website at strategictreasurer.com or in the show notes. With that, Craig, what are Treasury Aggregators?
Thanks. That might be the hardest question you can come up with today. Treasury Aggregators serve two key roles, two primary roles, and people have some different terms for these. So the first role is data consolidation or information consolidation. This is the process of pulling, for instance, bank information, balances, transactions, pulling that together and then feeding that to other systems at the organization, a reconciliation platform, an ERP, a treasury management system. So they'll make sure all of the connections that are necessary are handled. They'll get the data in, scrub it, and do whatever functions are necessary, and then deliver it to any and every place that's needed in the company. That's the first part, this information consolidation. The second is outbound. So it's payment. It's a payment hub functionality. So payment hub is the technology that's used to distribute payment instructions. Sometimes people use the term payment factory. We always use the more standard term for payment factory, which is the technology and group that handles payments, to stand for payment factory. But a payment hub is you send payments in from various systems, your ERP, admin systems, could be payroll. It'll handle the creation of those digital payment files, delivery to the bank, and the management of the traffic back and forth. So the two elements of a Treasury Aggregator are inbound information consolidation and outbound payment hub functionality.
So Craig, when we think about Treasury Aggregators and the payment functionality that they have, what are some of the payment challenges that Treasury departments are facing today, and how does this help them?
There are dozens of payment challenges. I'll list some of the key ones here in this discussion. I mean, one is, and you're familiar with these, payment security is a big issue. Fraud is on the rise, and the ability to protect our payment processes is completely taking over core activities and focus on the AP side, making sure payments are protected. That's one element. Another element that's related to that is complying with payment standards. So this might be sanction filtering. It might be some other in-country specifications. The other challenge is there's all kinds of new and exciting payment types, payment rails, different formats. And these are different. They have different requirements. And so these new payment rails are being incorporated by companies. And so this is a challenge. You have to support more payment types, just like you go through the line at the grocery store, and it's, it used to be a paper bag, then it was paper or plastic, and then it's paper, plastic, or bring your own container. There is this growing need to flex and support multiple payment types. The other factor, the last one that I'll mention, is that most companies grow in complexity. They are not only supporting more of these payment types that are new and emerging, they're also entering more countries. They have more currencies to deal with. They're touching more banks. And so this is just another area of complexity. So there's quite a bit facing Treasury, facing accounts payable. Any payment professional is probably facing this type of complexity that has to be solved.
So Craig, you talked about, one of the things that, I find interesting in today's environment is around the payment rails. That's something where we haven't had something new come by in some time. And so these new payment rails are coming out there. Does that make payment hub solutions that much more important to Treasury departments? And how does a Treasury department know whether they actually need a payment hub?
Well, if the first question is an easy one to answer, there is a growth of complexity around new payment rails and they have to be handled. The more complex your company is with regard to payments, and this can be because you acquired companies, you have 2, 3, 10, 50 different areas or systems that generate payments. Well, anytime, let's say you have to support a new payment rail, that may impact 5 systems or 15. Now you've got to do sanction filtering. That may impact all of them. Now you have to have some other function, and you have to support that activity across every level of complexity. If you have one single system in one country and one currency delivering one payment type, it's pretty simple. I would invite people on page 29 of the report. It's a free download report. It shows some of the elements about a complexity calculator that shows why people need to think about supporting payments, and they have to be consistent. So the more you have to do something, the more times you have to do something, the harder it is in a company. When do you need a payment hub? There's not a definitive point. I mean, it's pretty easy to say you don't need a payment hub if you're in that 1-1-1 situation. You deal with one bank, one payment type from one underlying system. That's just, there's going to be overhead. You're going to use your accounting system or what have you. But the more complexity you have, the more payment types you're supporting, the more you have to handle different types of return information or confirmation activity, the more difficult it is to handle that with your ERP, for example. When your complexity factor gets up there and you become complex, you might use a payment hub, you might use a Treasury Aggregator for payments. If it gets highly complex or hyper complex, the more that happens, the more you need to use the functionality of a payment hub.
Yeah, it seems like, today there's a lot of innovation out there in terms of payments, how payments are being disseminated and received, the systems out there to handle it. You hear people talk about, we talked about payment rails earlier, but, there's cryptocurrency, there's decentralized, centralized finance functionality, and continued innovation in terms of what constitutes a payment. With all these innovations and the things that companies, organizations are bringing to light in terms of how they make transactions happen, what are some of the bigger innovations that impact payment hubs today? What does that look like 5+ years down the road?
It's one thing to say you have a new payment rail. It's another thing to say you are changing how companies are connecting to their banks, ultimately to initiate payments or to receive information. So some of the innovations impacting payment hubs, I would say, would be some of the new payment types offer a lot more functionality, better visibility. They can contain a better payload of information that supports your business process. This transparency into where a payment is, particularly an international payment, that relieves massive amounts of headaches. And so that's an innovation that impacts payments and makes them move towards the frictionless side of the equation. Those impact payment hubs because people want and need that activity. Now, faster payments, there's certainly a need for greater speed. Sometimes there is a need for instant or real-time speed. But I think the key part there is that nothing with regard to payments is moving towards slower. Everything's moving faster at some level. So those are a couple pieces. The other has to do with innovations in not only things like sanction filtering, but applying community standards, the use of AI and machine learning to detect anomalous activity, which can be a quality control or a fraud protection device. So those are pretty significant developments, and certainly the use of APIs to stream the information across for initiating payments is having an impact because it's a new type of connection. So we've gone from the weird file formats or the fixed length file formats to the extensible markup language formats, the XML, which are rich and deep, and then we have methods of moving data, APIs, which are not really a file format, but they're still a way of connecting and moving data, kind of all combined. They're helping the development to mature nicely with payment hubs. So those are types of innovations that are impacting payment hubs for sure.
Craig, I really liked your comment about how payments are not moving to going slower. And I think about that. There is a demand for more speed. I also think about there's potentially down the road a demand for not only more speed, but more availability to make payments at any given time during the day, any day of the week. And so it really kind of changes the dynamics of what payments are today. And you look at it in the future, it becomes more complicated, and security issues become more complicated, and technology has to be able to keep up with that. Really kind of an interesting topic. I think payments back in the day when I started in the arena was pretty plain vanilla and boring. But, that was 30 years ago nearly. So today it's much more dynamic. It's an interesting topic. What constitutes cash, what constitutes a payment, and when and where you can do it. Well, thanks, Craig. That was great conversation. Appreciate the time on this subject today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Paul.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.